In this video, you're going to learn REST parameters in ES6. REST parameters are another great feature in ES6 which will make your coding a lot easier. So let's start with an example where we've got a function print all which takes a couple of parameters and prints them in the console like this. So if you try the function with 1 and 2, you know it's going to print them like that. Now, what if you don't know how many arguments the user or the function will take at some point, and you still want to print all of those arguments in the console? So you might think about the arguments variable, which you must be familiar with in ES5. All right. So inside this variable, you can find all your arguments. And just a quick reminder, this is not an array. All right. So now, if you try to loop over items inside the arguments, like this, and then log the items like this, each item of index I, then you can manage to get the items printed to the console like this. So you might not need all those lines. You can even skip that, and this will still work, right? Now, what if you would like to return an array of all the arguments that you pass to the function instead of logging those arguments like this? So in that case, you will need to define an array or an empty array, and then when you're going through your loop, you're going to be adding elements to the array using the push method, like this. And then you will return the array at the end. So now if you log this, then you know you're going to get an array showing all the arguments that you pass to the function. Now, this is in ES5. In ES6, there is an easier way of doing this using REST parameters. So what you're going to do, you just pass a parameter there, call it x for example, and use the REST parameter just before the parameter. Now, if you return x straight away, let's see what you get. You get an array combining all the arguments that you pass to the function. All right, so you can use the REST operator before a parameter to make sure it receives parameters compiled in an array. And this is usually used in the last parameter. So for example, you've got a first parameter x, and you want to combine all the remaining parameters inside an array like that. So this is going to be really useful if you don't know how many parameters your function is going to take. So let's say that we'll just log x and log y, and instead of logging the return of the function, we will just call the function like that. So you can see that we've got 1 as the first parameter, and the remaining parameters, they are compiled in an array. So this is a very useful feature in ES6. So now here is a quick challenge for you. So you would need to create a function, passenger check, which will take a couple of parameters, first name and last name, plus optional parameters, which will refer to the items or the belongings of the passenger. So the function will need to log something like this to the console, passenger, followed by the first name and last name of the passenger, and belongings, and you list all the belongings of the passenger. Alright, so I suggest you pause the video, then find the solution using ES6 and ES5, and then come back once you're done. Alright, so hopefully you managed to find the solution. So let's do this in ES6 first, which is going to be the easiest. So let's define a function, passenger check, and our function is going to take the following parameters. So first name, then last name, then the belongings of the passenger. So let's call them items. So we want these, or the belongings, to be combined or compiled into an array. So that's why we're going to use the REST operator. So now our parameter items is a REST parameter. So now our function is going to be as following. So we want to log passenger followed by first name, last name. So let's use template literals. So passenger, then first name, then last name. Okay, so let's just this for now. So pcheck of Mark Zuckerberg. And we can see that we've got the right console.log of the first name and the last name, which we passed to the function. Now we want to pass something else to the function, the belongings of the passenger. So let's say that he's got a bag and a suitcase. All right, so now what we need to do, we're going to need to check first if he's got any belongings. If he's got some, then we're going to print them like that. Otherwise, we're going to print none. So we're going to define a new variable. So let's call it belongings. And we're going to check if the length of our array items is greater than 0. If that's the case, this means that he's got belongings. So if that's the case, we're going to return items. Otherwise, we are going to return none like that. All right. And then we're going to console.log, or we can just use the same console.log we used before. And remember that you can have a line return. So belongings and you can see that this is now working. All right, and we've got the right print of the belongings. So if you try without any belongings, you get none. All right. So now let's move to ES6 and see how it works, or ES5. So let's call our function pcheck2, and this time we'll just give it a first name and last name. And then we're going to decide how we're going to process the remaining elements. So first, let's log the first name and last name. So passenger plus first name plus a space plus the last name. Okay. And then we're going to have a line return, which we'll use later on. So let's try this function with Bill Gates. So we get the right result there. So now we want to print the belongings of the passenger as well. So first, we're not going to be using the rest parameters because we are in ES5. So you're going to use the arguments variable like we did before. So if you log the arguments variable, let's just see what we've got inside. So here are our arguments. And now let's say that we've got the belongings. So let's say that he's got a backpack. Right. So here is our third argument. So now we need to be able to process these arguments. So the easiest way would be to get the remaining arguments as an array and then log them straight away. Otherwise, you can loop through the arguments variable and just skip the first two and then print each one separately. And it's going to be a lot of code. So the easiest here is going to be to convert the remaining arguments to an array and print it. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a variable. So let's call it Z. All right. And inside Z, we're going to store the arguments from the argument number 3. And we're going to carry on till the end. Now, if you remember, we used the method slice with arrays. Now, the arguments variable is not an array, although you can loop over it and you can check its length, for example, it's still not an array. And you can't apply the slice method to arguments. But there is a trick. We can use the slice method of the array class like this, and then we're going to use the call method to specify that this is going to be our arguments variable. All right. So if you do this and you log Z, let's see what we get. Here we go. So you're starting from the element of index 2, which is that one. And if you don't specify where you're ending, then you carry on till the end. All right. So in our case, we've got only one parameter or one element, backpack. That's why we've got only one inside the array. If you add something else there, then you're going to get 2. All right. And now let's add these there. So belongings, and then we're adding Z. All right, perfect. Now, what if we don't have any belongings? So what happens? So that's going to be empty, and we want to print none instead. So what you're going to do, we're going to check the length of our array, and we're going to define a new variable. So let's call it belongings. So we're checking the length of Z. If it's greater than 0, then it's going to be Z. Otherwise, it's going to be none. Now, instead of logging Z, we're going to log the variable belongings. All right, so let's save and try with belongings and then without belongings, and this time we get none. Perfect. So this was a good example showing how the REST parameters can make your coding a lot easier in ES6. So you didn't have to use the slice method or the call method, you just had to use the REST parameter and write some code straight away. Right, so in the next video, you're going to learn the spread operator.